What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in. Before we get into this week's episode, I just have a quick announcement. You may have noticed that the introduction to this podcast sounds a bit different. That's because I recently moved this podcast into my own name, which will allow me to grow the podcast beyond the limited expectations of a larger media corporation. As such, I built a new website, artuncoveredpodcast.com. I will be updating the archive links over the next few months. So if you are an artist who I have previously interviewed, please be patient. I promise to update all links within the next 6 to 8 months. If, however, you need an updated link sooner rather than later for promotional purposes, for example, if you have an upcoming show or you need to include it in an application, send me an email at artuncoveredpodcast@gmail.com, and I promise to prioritize our conversation. So this podcast will still run on a weekly basis. I will also be producing short videos with featured artists on a monthly basis beginning in January, so stay tuned for that. Also, I know many of you are big fans of the inclusion of music in each episode, and I am currently working to get licenses with independent labels to be able to bring that back to the platform. But in the meantime, I am building a series of Spotify playlists of music from emerging artists. Each playlist will be built around a certain theme. This month's theme is America and includes music by Ezra Furman, Bill Callahan, Azim the Artist, and more. To listen, make your way over to our new website, artuncoveredpodcast.com. There you will also see a donate button in the right-hand corner of the screen. Any amount will be graciously accepted as I am now running this podcast on my own. I promise any donation will be put right back into ensuring the continuation of this weekly podcast. And that's enough of your time for now. Let's get into this week's episode. Thanks again for tuning in. My guest this week is Julia Kwon, a Korean-American artist working with textiles. Julia's work explores the objectification of the Asiatic female body and the complexity of constructing identity within the context of globalism, cultural hybridity, and intersectionality. We also talk about her COVID face mask project titled Unapologetically Asian, which was recently acquired in part by the Smithsonian. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so honored to be here with Julia Kwon. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Julia, I want to focus most of today's conversation on a project that I was recently introduced to by you. And the title of the project is Unapologetically Asian. And first I want to congratulate you because I heard through the grapevine that you recently had a piece from this series accepted into the collection of the Smithsonian, which is wonderfully exciting. So congratulations on that. I'm just,
thank you.
In like the briefest way possible, I'm just going to describe this project in literally only a couple of words, and then I'll hand the mic over to you to get a deeper sense of, of what you were working on and towards with this work. So again, in short, it's a project where you are making hand-stitched masks, like COVID face masks, out of Korean silk. So yeah, can you take us through the process of how you emotionally conceptualize this project?
Yeah. Well, I was creating work that commented on ethnicity and gender and my own experiences of being seen and treated differently in the States. And so I was already thinking a lot about that. And then the pandemic started. and I was hearing a lot of COVID-19 related anti-Asian rhetoric spoken by top government officials, and just learning about the many hate crimes committed against Asian people currently living in the States. I've also had many intimate conversations with family and friends who were also feeling extremely anxious and concerned for the safety of themselves, but also their loved ones. And so, I was hearing a lot of these incidents from my friends as well, and of being accosted by strangers in public for simply being Asian, and again, falsely accused of carrying or causing the virus. And so after feeling tired and frustrated by the sense of defeat and the pressures to possibly just exist quietly and invisibly, I instinctively created a face mask. And it took me another, I think, week or two to process what I'd made, and also share it on Instagram, because the fact that I should be wearing a mask and everyone should be wearing a mask was clear, and there was a clear health benefit for myself, but especially for the general public health. But this sense of safety did not really come along with this act of wearing a mask in that climate, right? And in this current climate where simply being Asian is a way that you are targeted. And so, I created these vibrant Korean patchwork masks to not only promote public mask wearing, but also more specifically to unapologetically celebrate my ethnic identity and to confront COVID-19 related racism prevalent today.
Brilliant. So I want to comment on a couple of things that you mentioned there. So one thing I want to ask you about is, it seemed like there was some hesitancy in the beginning to share this work and talk about it. You said specifically on Instagram. I'm wondering if you've felt I don't know if it's a fear, or maybe I'll ask you, what did you feel before you felt that confidence to talk about your heritage and your fear and the racism around you?
Yeah, I think it's just fear, anxiety, a lot of things that I was feeling that was happening real time, just constantly hearing about these incidents, and also these rhetorics were coming from top government officials. And so it was very discouraging, I think, to just come out and share what all the things, all the subtle feelings and different anxieties that I was feeling. And so, I think it took me a while to just process what was going on, what seemed to be a trend, unfortunate trend that was happening in the country, and then also how I relate to that, or how I'm processing that in my personal life. I think it took me a while to share it. I don't know. I think in terms of the bigger picture of my practice, it completely makes sense that I created it, and that it's very much in tune with my concerns of being seen as this multifaceted human being, and so this is a conversation that I've been having through my work, but I think it just took me a while to really process this, what felt like a newer level of hostility and violence, that I don't know. I think I'm not surprised, but I'm always shocked that this continues. And so I think it took me a while to speak up, and I think Asian cultures, you're not super open about what you're going through, right? What you're feeling, or especially trauma. It takes a while to, I think, admit that you're going through that. And so, I think there was a lot of reflection that was happening for me to feel comfortable, speaking out, this is happening and we should be acknowledging that. And then also we all should be taking care of ourselves, but also our community, our larger society.
How do you feel now that you have spoken up?
Yeah, well, the reception of the work has been overwhelmingly positive. I received a lot of encouraging messages from allies, but also especially from fellow Asian Americans who shared with me that they have felt seen and heard, and they were feeling the same sense of anxiety of just existing out in the world. And so, supporters of the work became active participants as they wear the mask in solidarity, discuss the project with others, and also bring awareness to the experiences of Asian people as well as our other marginalized communities that are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also systemic racism.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the aspect of the work where you say that you're honoring your heritage. So I'm wondering, what is different about your masks that raises it to the level of honoring, right? Because at this point in time, masks, it's something that we see every day, and most of us put one on multiple times a day. So what about yours are unique?
Yeah, the work is directly drawing inspiration from traditional Korean patchwork, and I've been working in the format of Korean patchwork object wrapping cloth called bojagi. And so by employing bojagi that was historically created by Korean women who had limited contact with the outside world during the Joseon Dynasty, which was from 1392 till 1910, I'm considering ideas such as cultural identity, tradition, craft, and feminized labor. And the Korean silk fabric that are used in the mask are also recognized instantly by many Korean people as something that is very Korean and familiar. So I find it especially fitting to celebrate my ethnicity through wearing the Korean patchwork mask against the backdrop of, this horrific increase in anti-Asian hate in the U.S. today.
Brilliant. Oh, I just thought of something. So I started the talk by kind of talking about this acquisition of one of your masks by the Smithsonian. But I guess I'm wondering for you, where is it, in your opinion, like more, I don't want to say valuable, but where do you prefer to see it, right? Do you prefer to see your work on pedestals, or do you prefer to see them on people's faces out in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to see it everywhere, right? And that's true not just with my own work, but I think with a lot of other, Asian artists' work and Asian voices. I think it's important and significant, not just for me, within my personal art practice, but significant that the work has been included in the Smithsonian art collection because of the significance of that, right? The voices and experiences of Asian community living in the States is important, right? This isn't just one incident, right? It is a issue that we should acknowledge and we are actively grappling with. And so I think because of that fact, I think it's significant that, it was included in the collection. But I also just want to acknowledge that it's just my take on this very serious issue. And so, and there's a lot of other issues that concern the Asian community, right? Asian American community. So at least with my practice, I would like to see it like on people's faces, actively being used, and, discussed, and again, discussed not only in terms of Asian hate, but also just larger systems of white supremacy and systemic racism. But also, again, I know that it's also important to have sort of a marker, right, in this larger collection of the nation to acknowledge this issue and to also wanting to see not just my own voice and my own experience, but also other many diverse experiences of the Asian American community included in that collection in the future as well.
Can I just get a timeline for when you created this project? Was this created before the murder of 6 Asian women last month in Atlanta?
Yeah. So the project was surprisingly created like almost instantly after the start of the pandemic. So wow. I think I was aware very much of the, start of COVID-19 related violences that was happening across the country. And, again, it took me a while for, myself to process. And I think I created my first mask sometime maybe mid to late March, I want to say. And it took me a while, like a week or two to process and share it. I think it was early April or something.
And this was of 2020.
Yeah, and so we were collectively wanting to flatten the curve for COVID-19 cases. And I worked on the project most intensely, for the first couple of months during the start of the pandemic earlier last year, so 2020. And it started out as a rapid response project where I was mainly getting the message out that this is a serious problem, and then also that we should be wearing masks. And so, it was very much... I guess like a year or so earlier than what happened in Atlanta.
Do you think about the project differently now?
Yes and no, I guess. I guess it sadly feels more relevant in this horrific sense. I think the context is the same for me. I was already aware that this was happening, and anti-Asian hate and rhetoric, it wasn't like it didn't exist before. And obviously the history of the country, there are certain moments where you can't deny that Asian people are seen as this perpetual foreigner, and so I already knew sort of the backdrop of that history and what seemed like a new trend, at least in regards to the pandemic. And so, I was already concerned when that started to happen. And I know that many of my friends and family around me were also concerned about just going out in the world and doing like simple tasks. There was a very clear anxiety that they were feeling. And so, so it's, the context is the same, but also what happened there, the enormity, horrific enormity of what happened in Atlanta. It's the same context, but again, the sad part is that we don't see it stopping, and it seems like this hate is just amplifying. So it's maddening and frustrating for sure.
This is Art Uncovered. We'll be right back. Hey all, I just want to use this mic break to let you all know of a couple of anti-Asian racism resources that we compiled recently. There is the Asian American Foundation, whose mission is to raise the influence and well-being of the Pan-Asian American community. There's Stop AAPI Hate, who tracks and responds to incidents of violence, harassment, discrimination, shunning, and child bullying against the AAPI community. There's 18 Million Rising, who brings Asian American communities together online and offline to reimagine Asian American identity. And there's the Asian American Writers Workshop, who is devoted to creating, publishing, developing, and disseminating creative writing by Asian Americans. If you would like further information about these resources or any other available resources, feel free to email me at artuncoveredpodcast@gmail.com. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Now, back to the show. Welcome back. This is Art Uncovered. My guest this week is Julia Kwon, and before the break, we were talking about her project Unapologetically Asian, in which she created face masks out of Korean silk. And we'll return now by talking about some of her earlier work. Does your earlier work, do you think that is also a form of honoring your Korean identity?
Yeah, so I've been sewing interpretive Korean object wrapping cloths and wrapping hollow human scale figures with them to comment on the objectification of Asiatic female bodies. And I also embed patterns from contemporary socio-political events to challenge the notion of authenticity or this otherness, and to examine the complexities of constructing an identity within this contemporary context of globalism and cultural hybridity. And so I've been trying to create work that's not simply about a representation of minority identities, but rather have the work be a commentary on the dehumanizing problematic process of being reduced and categorized into this narrow preconception of what I should be. And so, yeah, very much concerned about gender and ethnicity, and yeah.
Yeah, and in both projects, obviously, there's the labor of sewing, right? So I'm wondering if you learned to sew for your art practice, or if that's something that is, is passed down to you in your family.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was around and was aware of female family members being very crafty, and I say that word crafty in a very positive way.
It's funny we have to clarify that, isn't it? When graduating from art school, anyway.
Yeah, I think within the art context, right, art world context, and this art historical context, craft is, sadly, there's a hierarchy, and so I need to specify and clarify. But I had family members, or like grandmother and great grandmother's embroidery work. They would create these intricate embroidered thimbles. There were a lot of calligraphy work created by my grandmother, and even my mother. She would upholster chairs, or would make curtains, and so I was very much aware of this empowering DIY spirit, and also this very shrewd attention to detail and technical skills. So I was aware, and I have these earliest memories of textile involving my family. But yeah, I think it was, when it comes to seriously considering textiles, it was during grad school where I was grappling with this issue of being seen as the other, and how can I effectively talk about this without both being specific about my identity, but without maybe putting a Korean person in my imagery. And so wanting to both talk about my identity in a specific way, but maybe not so in an explicit, representational way, I thought textiles would be a great way to tap into this abstract aesthetic, but yet very distinctly Korean aesthetic. And I also think just textiles in general, it's a great way to talk about culture and also just personal history and identity, because it is very much a part of our everyday lives.
So did you find textiles in grad school? And I guess I'm asking that because I'm curious if you did more representational or figurative work before graduate school.
Yeah, before graduate school, I was coming in as a painting and drawing person.
Okay.
And then I was mainly dealing with working in a gestural abstraction manner, and I was definitely seeing a limit to that because abstraction, it's very maybe sometimes difficult to show the specific references that you're making. But I also enjoy this space of openness, right, where there is room for interpretation, and I think hopefully the work is very specifically talking about something and commenting on something, but it's not didactic, and there is room for interpretation or other connections that people can make beyond what I am saying. And I think the power of art, I see that as a big power of art, that there's room for interpretation and further discussion that maybe isn't exactly what the artist has intended, but there's that room of openness, right? And so I was very much enjoying that space of openness, and so I wanted to still be there, but still talk about my specific experiences as a Korean American woman living in the States.
Yeah, brilliant. So I read I don't remember if it was an article or something that spoke about you and your work, and it's kind of unrelated, but I don't know, maybe it's related to art. And I read that you're super into gardening.
Yeah. I am super into gardening. I still feel like I'm learning. I'm still learning. So yeah, amateur gardening enthusiast.
When did your interest in it start? Was it pandemic related?
Yeah, it actually started before then.
Okay.
I forget how long ago, but I It's been a while, but I went on this, I just was binging a lot of documentaries on, food-related documentaries, basically. And oftentimes, it is a health-related issue of wanting to know what you're putting in your body, but it's also just an environmental concern as well. When we buy food, anything really, we're creating waste. And so that was another interest. So there's a lot of, wanting to connect with the earth and the food that I consume, but also possibly reduce the amount of plastic food packaging waste that I was creating through just buying food from grocery stores. And then also during my years in Boston, it's a city, right? And so you don't get to enjoy nature in the way that maybe you would do in the West Coast. And so I think there was also this desire to connect to planting something and seeing something grow, and to have this very close connection to the products of your labor.
So I actually noticed a connection to your art practice, but it's not so much in the act of growing or the act of making art, but more so in your gifting of this practice. So I read that you are you giving away seeds as a way to encourage others to garden? And that's so fabulously related to what we were talking about in the beginning, where you're, I'm not sure if they're for purchase or if you're just gifting allies these masks, but in both instances, you're giving the public these tools in a way to protect them and to keep them safe and healthy. And I think that's so lovely and wonderful.
Thanks for that. Thanks for those comments and that question. The math series, I was trying to make as many as I could and get it out to people who were willing to pay a fraction of the amount, because, again, it was started as this rapid response project. And so that's what I was doing in the early couple of months of the pandemic. And, while I wasn't working on something else, I was working on creating the masks and getting those out. And so, I have this larger textile practice that investigates identity and racism, sexism in the States, but also I'm very much interested in collaboration and community and personal relationship building. And so I've been working on various collaborative projects, and the seed sharing project, it was really impromptu. It was during the 2020 Thanksgiving. I was harvesting seeds from my garden, and I had more than enough for myself because my home garden isn't that large. And I was also thinking of adding new variety of produce and flowers and fruits. And so I knew that I would have more than enough seeds for myself and for me to share it with others, And a lot of the seeds that I'm interested in growing are kinds that you wouldn't necessarily have access to in your regular grocery store. So wanting to keep these seeds going, right? Heirloom seeds going, the only way I think, if I understand correctly, is that they're constantly being grown and saved, right? And so, just this idea of sharing with community was important, but also decolonizing my Thanksgiving was what framed that work. And, it was such a in-the-moment decision that I was like, I can share this, and then also acknowledge that, again, this land that we're living in, it's stolen land, and for us, many of us, it's borrowed land. And so, wanting to decolonize my Thanksgiving, and also to ask people who are like-minded if they were willing to pay whatever that they were comfortable with. I could send them 3 seed packets, basically, with my Linocut printed seed packets. And so, that was very in the moment. Project.
I love this. Are any of your masks or seeds still available for sale?
Yeah, I have a handful of seeds that are available. This might be a good time for people to reach out if they are interested in.
Yeah, totally. We have a week and a half left for seeds. Yeah, so if listeners do want to reach out to you, is the best way through your website or Instagram?
Yeah. They can reach out through my website. There's a contact page, and they're also welcome to reach out through Instagram as well.
Yeah, perfect. So listeners, I'm going to include a direct link to Julia's website. And of course, if you want to get in touch with her, you could always send me a message and I'll make sure that Julia gets the message. Well, Julia, thank you so much for speaking with us today. And yeah, just for the work that you do and this conversation, it really is an honor.
Oh, thank you again so much for the conversation.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Please be sure to tune in next week as I will be speaking with Corinne, a multimedia artist who explores ideas of performance, personas, and consumerism. Throughout the conversation, we speak about their experience of creating a public access video series titled Coloring Corinne and a widely circulated zine, Salad. We also talk about the intersection of performance and consumer culture, and of course, this year's catalog. Please tune in and have a safe week. Bye.